Thanks, E.G. Um, I was going to tell the story about the robbery, so I'm done. My father said it's for sure those guys weren't from around here, because if they had been, they'd have known that they'd been kept all his money on his hip. So it's a great story, and it really did happen. Um, my sisters, Patricia and Melinda, and I grew up not directly across the street, but one block over. I could look out of my bedroom window and see Merritt's. And you have to understand that for a child growing up in this part of town, this had a lot of very specific, important meanings in our life. For example, it was the only place you could get air in your bicycle tire. Now, if you think about that, and you're a kid and you got to go on your bike everywhere, a source of air is very important. And Mr. Merritt had a little air pump out there on the side, and you could always come down and get your bike tire filled up with air. Second thing is, in the wintertime, it was very important that Merritt's was here because it was always warm. And those of you who are from around here know what a great sledding hill Purefoy Road is right over here. Well, by the time we'd been over there about half the day and were soaking wet and frozen from the hip down, being able to come to Merritt's and get warmed up was a very special treat. And I was thinking when I came in earlier today, if I had a nickel for every little small vanilla cream donut I had eaten out of those little 6-packs in this store right here, I could retire. Most of those donuts are still with me. But there was a drink machine that sat outside of the garage up there by the air pump, and you could get an RC out of that machine and pop the top off of it in the dead of summer, and the ice crystals would form in it. And when you poured your peanuts in, it was really ready to go at that point. You just had to believe it. So I can't remember how many thousands of times I have been in this store and seen Mr. Merritt and my Uncle Glenn and Ben Grantham and Marvin and all of them on the philosopher's bench over here. It was like part of the family. And our families were close. The Merritts were right here and the Fields were right there. So we were all in the same neighborhood. So I really wanted to be part of this today when my mother told me that they were going to be honoring Merritt's. And I'm really glad to be here. And those of you who've grown up around here know what this store means, not just to the community, but to the folks that lived here. And we loved Mr. Merritt, which is all I ever called him, was Mr. Merritt. There's just not many like that around anymore, so he's a great guy. And I have a great sister.
TikTok. Oh, don't leave. I have a case of vertigo, so I may tip over any minute. Thank you. I'm Trish. I want to say that Mr. Merritt was one of the only grown-ups when I was a kid in the 50s and the 60s who treated children like everybody else. He didn't patronize us, he didn't ignore us or brush us away. He did touse my hair. I had a little pixie haircut, as did Melinda, my sister, and he would always inquire whether I was a little boy or not. And this one used to tell me I was supposed to be a brother for him, but I didn't make it. My kindergarten, I walked 2 blocks up to the Little Red Schoolhouse, and then in first grade we were carted up to Franklin Street School, but in second grade we walked a block over to Columbia and caught the school bus. And I realized that yes, I could cross the street without a grown-up around, and there starts my solo excursions through the woods, or Miss Holloman's house, or the 3 little girls that were the Advents in the little white house here. We would cross over, and I unfortunately got my sister off to the wrong track and brought her with me. I had to keep her from falling into the oil bin where they used to change the oil. She was afraid of that. Oh, and the back steps, that was kind of scary. But like Walter said, Uncle Glenn was over here, and he could front us a penny or 2 for some candy, or we would collect the bottles and come in. And the ice cream, you forgot about that. The ice cream in the great big freezer with the lids that would go back and forth. But the thing that I remember the most was the people who sat around and talked about life, the philosophers, the professors. But a couple of guys I used to listen to would talk about being in the military and flying jets and having emergency procedures and crashing here or there. And who were those guys in the old days? Yeah, the astronauts for Mercury and Apollo and Gemini came and trained at Moorhead Planetarium, and those were the people that I listened to when I was, second, third, fourth grade. Made an impact.
She's been flying ever since.
I was a military pilot and have been flying for 35 years, so I did remember that.
It's all because of Merritt.
Yeah, it was Mr. Merritt. It was Mr. Merritt not making us go home and just sort of letting us be. I'd like to recognize my sister, who was a culprit in this, and my mom, who's on the board. Just one quick thing. 35 years ago, I left Chapel Hill, and although you may geographically move, Chapel Hill never leaves you. And I don't really have the memory of Merritt's as my brother and sister because I'm the youngest of the three, but it was such a special place of wonderment, and as Walter said, we could see it out of the windows of the house, as Mother still lives now, and it's just so special. And Ruby and Evan, that's all I would hear my grandparents talk about. I mean, it's just so special. And I have a physician in Spartanburg who has become a very good friend, and one day we were talking, he goes, well, Linda, where are you from? And this was about 20 years ago, and I said, well, I'm from Chapel Hill. He said, no kidding, I went to medical school there. And I said, really? He said, where did you grow up? I said, well, there's this little place called Merritt's. He said, oh, everybody knows where Merritt's is. So no matter where you travel, worldwide, magazine or not, Merritt's is a landmark for Chapel Hill, and I'm so grateful and proud to be part of this.
Richard Ellington, customer and friend. And main history man.
Thank you, DJ. Well, I want to make one addendum to the robbery story that I have been told. I was told that when they came, that Ben was the one that did the shooting at the robbers, and they were lucky because if Evan had gotten a hold of the .357, he was a good shot and he would have gotten them. They would have been dead.
That's what he said.
No aspersion on Ben. My dad, I grew up here in Chapel Hill, in Carborough. My dad was a building contractor here for many years and did business with Mr. Merritt because he was, as a building contractor, he needed, grading and hauling and excavating done. And as a kid, I remember where all you folks are parked across the street. Well, that's where Eben kept his collection of tractors and trucks and such things over there. And that's what I remember, and that's when it was just a two-lane street, and because I remember coming over there, it was like going to the fair, seeing all of those trucks and tractors and stuff there, and that was just cool stuff to climb on, and nobody ever said a word to me about it. My dad told me a couple of things about Eben and whatever, and so this is just secondhand, okay? So I'm not swearing this is true, but he said that one Saturday Eben left the store and went over to Raleigh. He had to go to Gregory Poole, who was the Caterpillar dealer in Raleigh, and he was needed to buy a new piece of equipment, and so Eben went over there and said he had on his best bib overalls, and they were nice and they were clean. He was like he was going to church. And he walks in, and this is Saturday afternoon. I remember, so, kind of probably a slow day in the tractor business, but he's looking at some stuff in the showroom there at Gregory Poole. And so this salesman comes up to him, and here's Evan standing in his bib overalls and a cap, and the fellow says to him, "Could I help you, sir?" And so Mr. Evan looks around. He said, "Yes, son, I need to buy a new tractor." And so the man said, "All right." He said, "What are you interested in?" So they had looked at one of them. Something like this one over here. And they were standing there looking, and so the gentleman, the salesman, asked him, said, "Now what, how exactly would you like to pay for this?" And after they had come to an agreement on a price, And Eben said, oh, well, I'll pay cash. And he unzips the bib and pulls out a wad of $100 bills and starts peeling them off. The salesman hit the door running. He said, I can't take money on Saturday afternoon. The banks are closed and we can't touch it. And he refused to take the man's money. He had to go back, as the story was told, he had to go back next week to actually buy the tractor because they would not take his money on Saturday afternoon. Now, it probably wasn't more than $10,000 then. This was in the 1960s, 60, 65, somewhere in that area. So that's what. Was one other story I wanted to relate to you. For those of you that have been around long enough to remember when Culver School was built, okay, the land that Culver School is built on and the land that you drive on the road to get to Culver School were owned by Ebb and Merritt. And when that school was built, they negotiated with Mr. Merritt to buy that property. Now, Mr. Merritt was a shrewd businessman. I once heard him described as he was dumb like a fox. And now, that's a compliment. In the South, that's a compliment. But the story was that Mr. Merritt negotiated with them, and they only bought enough land to bring the road in off of Smith Level Road. And Mr. Merritt, as the story goes, tried to talk them into buying enough to just make the road come right on through to 15501, where it is now, right across from Farrington Road. And Mr. Merritt tried to talk them into just buying enough for that, and the school system, in its short-sightedness, decided not to. And so after they got the school in and the road in, or the road in first and then the school built and whatever, they realized their mistake and came back to Mr. Merritt. And I understand that's where he made most of his money from that sale. He knew he had them over a barrel. Thank you very much.
Well, I've been waiting to hear from Mr. Merritt's lawyer, Sid Alexander.
Well, actually, our relationship goes back long before I went to law school. My father was here in med school during World War II and got to be close friends with Evan. I don't know how that happened, but that was just the way Mr. Merritt was with everybody. And then he met my mother, who was an undergraduate. She graduated and went off to Virginia to teach school. And Dad was stuck trying to figure out how to court her. It was the war, gas was rationed, and you couldn't get it. And somehow Evan was able to make sure that my father had gasoline every weekend to go meet with my mother. And that's the credit that they had. So he was always a very special man in our family. After the war, Dad came back to the university here, and we lived over in Westwood, just around the corner from the fields. So I grew up here, coming down to put air in our tires and eat the ice cream and all the rest of it, like all the rest of us did, at age 5. And I remember one summer when we were here, the Carolina Theater, which was on Franklin Street at that time, had a special Saturday matinee. And if you showed up with 5 caps from a Coca-Cola bottle, you could get in free. And as Walter said, there was a drink machine on the front of the store. So we would come down here and wait around for people to get drinks. And you try and get the cap, right? And Evan wanted to know what we were doing. So we told him. And the next time we came down here, he'd gotten a little flat magnet with a hole in it, tied a string on it. And he showed us how to fish into the box to get the caps out. So he was Mr. Merritt with the magic magnet. That's the kind of person he was to all of us children. This was before the bypass was in. So in addition to bringing our bikes down here and playing, we'd ride over to the pasture, because it was a great place to play and fly kites and, of course, to chase his cows. Now, that didn't sit very well because he was trying to fatten them up, and in hindsight, it probably wasn't very safe anyway. So he'd run us off after a little bit until a friend and I went over there with a bow and arrow. And this was a child's bow and arrow with one of those suction cup sticky things on it. We were determined we were going to shoot these cows and see if we could get it to stick on there. That didn't suit at all. So after that, he always had a large bull in the pasture. And it was out there. He was very subtle about it. There it was. when I did finish law school, I was back here and opened an office. This is the mid-'70s. And there was one day when I came down, I'd been in court. I came down to visit and just sit on the bench and I think drink a beer, which we were probably not supposed to do. And somebody walked in from the town who was an inspector, who clearly had something he wanted to say to Mr. Merritt, and he had papers to deliver to him, and it was not going well. And Evan turned his back on the gentleman, wouldn't talk to him, and wouldn't look at him. And he finally turned around and he said, "Look, if you have something to say, talk to my lawyer." And he pointed to me. I thought, oh my God. So I took this beer and put it behind, and I had a suit on for being in court, and I got up and went to speak to the gentleman, and it was tense, and I said, "I think we better take this outside," which we did. And he explained the circumstances to me, and I said, leave the papers with me, and let me go back in and just give us a couple days, and I think we can work something out here. So I came back into the store, and Mr. Merritt looked at me, and before I could say anything, he said, "You are now my lawyer." I went, "Yes, sir." And he said, "And I have a rule. I do not go to lawyers' offices. You will come here, and we will do all our business here." And I said, "That's fine with me." And I was privileged to serve as his lawyer for the rest of his life, and it was very special.
What a treat. Thank you, Sid. We're in for a treat. Bland Simpson is next on the list. Unfortunately, no piano, no musical instruments, but I bet a story that was worth waiting for.
I wish I did have a tap dance band. Hello, folks. This is a very special place to me and my family, as it is to so many of you all here. My grandfather, J.A. Page, was in charge of construction at UNC for the contractor that had the UNC contract for many years, from 1924 to 32, and he hired Evan Merritt on many occasions to haul gravel and sand, and also to come unload. There was a train that came through the center of campus, right up where the flagpole is in Polk Place now, and brought building materials for all the quad that was being built then, which included, at the lower end, the south end, Wilson Library. And my grandfather said he could hire, this is contract work, he could hire Evan Merritt and his crew, and they would come up and unload a boxcar of lime, shirts off, shovels, and go into that boxcar and unload it in an hour. And he told me other stories like that. He said Evan Merritt was the hardest working man he ever knew. And he knew a lot of hard working folks. So I heard